Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny and every week I post a video about a true crime story that has happened somewhere in the world. So if you like true crime, if you like deep dives, then I highly suggest you hit that subscribe button because you will not be disappointed. Now, before we jump into today's case, I do just want to mention that this video is created without any background sound. So usually when I edit my videos, I have a music track playing very quietly in the background, but I had wondered whether or not to ditch that and just have talking at the camera. So that's what I'm trying today. One person mentioned that they didn't love the sound, so that kind of told me everything I need to know. So please do let me know down in the comment section below. What do you think? Do you prefer videos like this that don't have any music in the background, or do you like music? Let me know. Today's story is a heavy one, and it's actually quite a recent case. I usually cover cases that are a bit on the older side, so you know, minimum 10 years or so, usually more like 20. But this one actually only happened 3 years ago, and in fact the legal proceedings only just concluded last week at the time of this filming. So it's likely that most of you have heard of this one before. I first heard about it when I saw the trial live on YouTube, and I've kind of followed it ever since, and this one really stuck with me, you know, like some of them really do. Every case is really heavy, and as I get into it, you'll see why this one has had quite an impact on me. Okay, let's get into today's story. So today's case takes us to Brooklyn in Iowa, a small, tight-knit, rural community located just off US Route 6 and a few miles north of Interstate 80. With a population of just under 1,500, the community of Flags boasts a friendly, warm, communal neighborhood where it's totally normal to leave your front door unlocked, and honestly, the thought of violent crime could not be further from anybody's mind. But tragically, all of that changed on a fateful evening in July 2018. So today we are talking about the devastating case of 20-year-old Mollie Tibbetts and how her disappearance completely shook the small town of Brooklyn, catapulted the issue of immigration into the political arena, and sparked national controversy. Mollie Cecilia Tibbetts was born on May 8, 1998 in San Francisco, California, to father Rob Tibbetts and mother Laura Calderwood. Mollie was the middle child with an older brother Jake and a younger brother Scott. Growing up, she attended elementary school in the Bay Area until 2nd grade, when sadly her mother and father divorced and her mother moved her and her 2 siblings to the small country rural farm town of Brooklyn, Iowa. Now, the rural setting of Brooklyn was a welcome change for the family, and this lovely new town offered acres and acres of land for the children to play on, and Mollie was able to walk to and from school. When it was time for her to attend high school, she enrolled in the Brooklyn, Guernsey and Malcolm Community School, otherwise known as BGM High School. She quickly settled in, she made heaps of new friends, and threw herself into theatre, writing and running. Mollie mostly ran distant events in high school, but she did not care about winning, placing, getting a medal or anything like that. Whenever her family or friends would ask her how a race went, she'd always talk about the people she'd met and the stories she'd heard, and never really about how she did. It wasn't about that for Mollie. And friends and family also noted how whenever she would finish a race, she was usually one of the last runners to complete the race, but as soon as she crossed the finish line, she would double back down the track and run alongside the other runners, cheering them on and supporting them while they finished the race. People in the community, friends and family, described Mollie as the quintessential all-American young woman. She had a heart of gold and she loved to help others and was always there when you needed a shoulder to lean on. Mollie had an infectious laugh, a beautiful smile, and a really good sense of humor. She didn't take herself too seriously, and she enjoyed playing jokes and messing around with her friends. Now, in 2015, Mollie met Dalton Jack. At a football game one evening, Dalton was sitting in his truck with a friend, and one of Mollie's friends came over to talk to them. Mollie wanted to be involved in the conversation too, so she walked over to the driver's side, tapped on the window and started talking to Dalton. And at this point, Dalton says the two were just in their own world and they hit it off immediately. And within 2 weeks, the two started dating, and over the next 3 years, their relationship deepened. And Jack said that Mollie was the love of his life. And in fact, he was planning to propose to Mollie in August 2018 when they flew overseas for his brother's wedding. At the young age of 20, Mollie had demonstrated this deep desire to help and support others. She had a natural ability for working with children and a gift for making people feel like they were the most important person in the room. So it was natural then that when Mollie graduated from BGM High School in May 2017, she would go on to study psychology at the University of Iowa. Friends and family said that this was the perfect career path for Mollie with her nurturing, caring character. In fact, teachers, friends, and family, they all swore that Mollie would go on to change lives. And honestly, she already had. Mollie just seemed to shine a light on every single person that she ever came into contact with. Nobody had a bad thing to say about her. And despite the distance, having moved from the Bay Area to Brooklyn, Mollie always remained close with her father, Rob. When Rob asked Mollie about marrying his now wife, Mollie was ecstatic. She could not wait for the wedding. The wedding took place in June 2018, and when Mollie's brothers and Rob's sons couldn't make the wedding, Mollie insisted that she be her father's best man. She gave a well-prepared toast and she called her father her best friend. Everybody in the room enjoyed it and they were laughing and crying. Tragically, that wedding would be the last time that Rob Tibbetts saw his daughter Mollie alive. So after finishing her freshman year in May 2018, Mollie spent part of the summer house sitting for her boyfriend Dalton and his brother Blake in Brooklyn. They were both out of town and Dalton had left for work on July 17th. He was working for a construction company that had placed him in Dubuque in Iowa, which was about 120 miles east of Brooklyn or just over 2 hours drive. And his brother Blake had 2 dogs, and one of the dogs had epilepsy, which is why Mollie had volunteered to stick around and look after the dogs while the 2 boys were away periodically throughout the summer. Mollie had been splitting her time over summer between Dalton's house and her childhood home with her mother, so she had belongings in both places and she wasn't really looking to settle down because she was actually preparing to move into her first apartment. And during the summer, Mollie spent her days working as a camp counselor for a day camp with the Grinnell Regional Medical Center. This wasn't far from Brooklyn, and she helped school-aged kids with literacy, art, music, and this was the second summer that she had been working with them. So after a hectic shift on July 18th, 2018, Mollie's brother dropped her off at Dalton's house. Mollie had been Snapchatting with Dalton and texting with her mum because she was going to go over for dinner that evening. Now, it was a super hot and humid day, and in fact the entire month of July throughout 2018 had been extremely dry, but Mollie really wanted to get in her usual daily run. That was part of her daily routine. She liked to run to clear her head. And she had a lot of homework to get through for her summer classes, but when the temperature began to drop as the sun started to set at around 7:30 p.m, Mollie decided to take advantage of the cooler weather, so she laced up her neon pink and blue running shoes, put on her black jogging shorts, a pink sports top, put in her wireless earbuds, and headed out the door for her jog. Mollie started heading east through town on one of her standard routes. She had her Fitbit on, which she wore every time she ran because she liked to track her progress, her times, and her routes. And depending on the day or her mood, Mollie would decide whether to do a short run or go on a longer one. And for whatever reason, on this particular day, she decided to do a longer run. And she chose to go down one of her standard routes, which was just a 6-mile out and back trip. And as she made her way further into the country, she was surrounded by cornstalks which were nearly as tall as her, and she stood at about 5 feet tall. Mollie knew the route like the back of her hand. She'd run it a million times before and could probably do it with her eyes shut at this point. At this point, a local hairdresser, Christina Stewart, was on her way to check on her parents' farmhouse, and as she drove round the bends, she had to carefully navigate her minivan over what would be the centre line, if there was one painted, to get around Mollie. and she made a mental note in her head that, you know, it was a little bit dangerous for Mollie to run on these bends because cars would take the corners quite quickly. And then about half an hour later, Christina was making her way back from the house, pretty much along the exact same way that she had come. And she was expecting to see Mollie again on her way back because she knew that given the distance and the time, she would be heading back into town by this point. But Christina did not pass Mollie on the way back to Brooklyn Center. Overnight, on the evening of Wednesday, July 18th, it rained really heavily. There had been a lot of storms in the area overnight, but the next morning, on the 19th, the weather was beautiful, which was great because the Grinnell Day Camp was preparing to go on a field trip. So the supervisor, Jill Sheck, she was waiting for Mollie to show up as the children started boarding the buses. They were really excited. They were going to a petting zoo and they were going to eat, you know, candy floss and have heaps of fun at the county fair. But Jill grew a little bit concerned because Mollie didn't turn up, and she would have expected her to have arrived at 8:30 because regardless of whether you're working the late shift or not, like Mollie was, everybody had to show up at 8:30 for check-in. Mollie did not turn up, and Jill thought this was highly unusual because it was very strange of her to A, not show up, and B, not actually call ahead to let her know. So she thought that was strange, but she reasoned that, you know, it's probably likely that Mollie actually just slept through her alarm, so she just sent her a bunch of text messages and then headed off on the bus on the way to the county fair. Meanwhile, 120 miles away in Dubuque, Dalton was working on a construction job. He had sent Mollie a text message at about 5:30 that morning with his usual greeting, "Good morning, beautiful," before heading off to the job site. But at around lunchtime, the weather had completely turned and the construction had been called off for the day. So Dalton headed back to his motel room and decided to take a nap because he was totally exhausted from working back-to-back 12-hour shifts. Back in Brooklyn, the buses began to roll back in from the county fair at about 3 p.m. And this is when Jill Sheck, the supervisor, and Mollie's other co-workers began to grow really concerned because Mollie hadn't shown up and they hadn't been able to reach her all day long. So Dalton was abruptly woken from his nap with a phone call from a concerned co-worker of Mollie's. She said they hadn't seen her all day and they couldn't reach her. Did he know where she was? Had he spoken to her? And she even sent him a text message saying jokingly, "Is Mollie alive?" Now, when Dalton heard that Mollie hadn't turned up and she hadn't even called ahead, he got very worried and he went back through his messages and saw that Mollie had not actually texted him back from that morning, which was very unusual because even when he was out of town, they always stayed in touch. They'd always text and Snapchat, so it was very strange that she wouldn't reply to him. Straight away, Dalton phoned Mollie, but he got no answer. So instead, he phoned her friends and family to see if they were able to track her down, but they were unsuccessful. So it was then that Mollie's mother found out that Mollie had disappeared, basically. Mollie's brother Scott phoned her to see if she had heard from her, and her mum hadn't heard from her, and she realized that she was actually supposed to come for dinner the night before and she hadn't turned up, and that was really strange as well. Mollie's mother said that alarm bells instantly began to ring in her head because she knew that this was completely out of character for Mollie, and she would not just disappear and not tell her family where they were because she knew that they would be really worried, right? So she said she knew something had to be wrong, and within 15 to 20 minutes of learning of Mollie's disappearance, she phoned 911 to report her daughter missing. Now, Dalton's job was supposed to keep him in Dubuque until the end of the week that Friday, but by the Thursday evening, he was so consumed with worry, he just couldn't stop thinking about Mollie that his boss agreed to let him go home early and he started driving back to Brooklyn. By the time he got home, the front lawn was a circus. The word of Mollie's disappearance had spread like wildfire. A crowd had gathered and people had already started brainstorming where they would search for Mollie the following day. Everybody in the town knew that Mollie was not somebody who would just go off the radar, and that if she was missing and no one had heard from her, this was bad. Again, Dalton tried to phone Mollie, but this time there wasn't even a ring. There was no voicemail. Her phone was just completely dead. Quickly, Dalton's brother Blake also returned home early from his trip, and the two guys together decided to go out in their car and try and search for Mollie. Blake thought that maybe because there had been so many tornadoes in the area that it was possible she had been hurt during one of the storms, but again, nobody had seen anything. Immediately, Mollie's disappearance prompted a massive investigation. The day after Mollie went missing, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation joined the case, and over 400 people gathered to join the search for Mollie. Things ramped up even further on the 23rd of July when the FBI got involved in the investigation. Authorities began to dig into Mollie's life to find out what could have led to her disappearance, but law enforcement couldn't find a single of the usual red flags that they would expect to find in this case. She wasn't using drugs or alcohol, she wasn't in an abusive relationship, she had good relationships with her friends and family, and honestly, nobody had a bad word to say about her. In fact, she didn't even swear in her text messages. Law enforcement and volunteers were searching tirelessly for her, and every single day of the investigation there would be upwards of 40 investigators working on the case at one time. There were thousands of tips to go on, and they were conducting hundreds of interviews. They started looking at Mollie's inner circle. Her brothers sat for interviews, her parents answered questions, and Dalton consented to letting officers search his home and his vehicle. And ultimately, they found nothing. Investigators worked methodically, examining every single suspicious character as they rose. They scrutinized a farmer in the area with a deviant sexual past. They questioned a man who had ditched a vehicle nearby. They talked to one of Mollie's school friends who had suspiciously wiped all the data off his cell phone, and they spoke to a man who had been cleaning his vehicle very late at night in the hours after Mollie's jog. More than 200 leads had come in, and investigators had to diligently pursue and exhaust every single one of them. And of course, many of the public were quick to assume that the boyfriend did it, as so often is typical in this case. But on the 25th of July, Sheriff Tom Kriegel publicly announced that Dalton Jack had been totally cleared as a suspect in an effort to try and quell some of the rampant rumors that were flying around the town. Authorities and volunteers were combing through massive stretches of land in and around the Brooklyn area. Investigators were canvassing neighborhoods and conducting hundreds of interviews. They also searched a pig farm nearby in Guernsey, which is about 10 miles away from Brooklyn, a couple of times, and people thought that that might lead to something, but again, that was just another dead end. And it didn't help that it was hot as hell that summer. The corn stalks were fully grown at that point, making it really difficult to see through them. It made air searches really hard because they couldn't see through the corn either. All the ditches were scraggly and overgrown, and the search dogs were really struggling because they would overheat really quickly, and it just made life just that much more difficult. So as time went on, the volunteer search was called off, and investigators instead focused their attention on Mollie's digital footprint. A data expert was able to determine that until about 8:30 p.m, Mollie's cell phone was moving east at a rate of about 10 minutes per mile, which is consistent with the speed at which she was running and the direction. And then at about 8:35, her phone jumped 5 miles south and started pinging off a tower going about 60 miles per hour, which suggests that she'd been running and then was riding in a car. But still, as the days dragged on and July turned into August, there was no sign of Mollie. It was like she had just vanished into thin air without a trace. On August 2nd, 2018, Mollie's family held a press conference offering a cash reward of $172,000 for information leading to the safe return of Mollie Tibbetts. With the announcement of the reward money, donations began flooding in from all over the United States, and the reward money grew to almost $400,000, which actually was a record in central Iowa. With the frustrating lack of clues, Mollie's family went on an all-out media blitz. And her father, Rob, said the publicity was like a way of fighting back and taking control of the situation. So Mollie's school classmates, friends, community members began putting up missing person flyers all over town. The family were conducting interviews with pretty much anybody who wanted to speak with them, including news agencies as far as Indonesia. And actually, here in New Zealand, I can attest to the fact that our very own national news agency, the New Zealand Herald, even covered Mollie's story. So it really did have a global impact, you know. The main street of Brooklyn, Iowa was plastered from head to toe with missing person flyers, posters, lawn signs, and they were all printed by the local press, who said that they were pulling 19-hour days to do a run of 20,000 flyers in that first week. At this point, investigators began looking at Mollie's Fitbit data. They were hoping that the GPS in her Fitbit might be able to lead them to her final location or where she'd gone or something. But sadly, for whatever reason, on that particular evening of July the 18th, her run hadn't uploaded to the cloud. So again, that was another brick wall for investigators. Mollie's disappearance became a super high-profile case, and it even got the attention of the Trump administration. During a visit to Des Moines in Iowa, the then Vice President Mike Pence paid a visit to Mollie's father, Rob Tibbetts, her two brothers, and her boyfriend, Dalton. And apparently that meeting lasted about 20 minutes, and he told them that he had spoken with the FBI director and that Donald Trump himself passed on his best wishes. By this point, Mollie had been missing for nearly a month, and people were starting to get grumbly in the community about the lack of progress or leads in this case. But law enforcement were not about to give up, and they were working tirelessly behind the scenes. They held on to hope that someone in the community would have something that would unlock the mystery of this disappearance and hopefully lead them to find out what happened to Mollie. So they congregated in their war room, which was an empty conference room at the back of the Brooklyn fire station. This was where all of law enforcement and investigators were working from during this case. And they had a giant printout of the map of the Brooklyn area, and they'd kind of marked out the route that they believed that Mollie had taken. All over the map, they had marked houses in either red or yellow, and red meant that they had spoken to them, and yellow meant that they were yet to be spoken with. Investigators said that because it was 2018 and pretty much everybody was recording everything these days, they were sure that there had to be some CCTV or security camera footage out there somewhere in the community that might point them in the direction of what happened to Mollie. So they decided to go and speak with the houses marked in yellow that they hadn't yet visited. So on the morning of August 15th, 2018, nearly a month since Mollie Tibbetts had disappeared, investigators would get their first big break in the case. During their canvassing of the areas marked in yellow, investigators visited the home of a Brooklyn resident named Logan Collins, and as soon as they arrived, they noticed that he had security cameras positioned leading away from his house all around the edge of his house, and they asked him if he would mind if they viewed the footage. Now Logan had 4 security cameras set up north, south, east and west around his home. All of the footage was stored on a 1 terabyte hard drive for 30 days after it was taken, and incredibly, the footage from the 18th of July would have been deleted in just 4 days. So it's remarkable that they managed to get there when they did. DCI agent Derek Reeson pulled a double shift to go through all of the newly acquired security footage. The camera angle had a view of 2 possible ways that Mollie could have gone on her run. One was the road that this house sat on, it was a clear view and unobstructed, and another was of an intersection quite a while away that had cars and you could see pedestrians, but they were so far away that they were basically like little blips on the screen. Going through all the grainy footage was a super draining task, but the agent knew that it was really important that they go through this really carefully, and he'd been on the case since day 1, so he was really ready to figure out where Mollie was and finally get a break in the case. And then fellow agent Matt George came over to see how he was going, and he asked him what he was doing, and As Reeson turned around to say, "Oh, I'm looking for any signs of a jogger," George pointed out that he thought he'd seen something on the screen. And originally Reeson thought that he was just joking, but then he realized actually he was serious. And when they rewound the footage, that's when they saw it. There was a glimpse of what could just be made out to be a person with a ponytail going past the intersection. It was such a small fraction of a glimpse that if you blink you would miss it. But that runner was Mollie Tibbetts. And finally, the team had their first break in the case. So agents quickly divided up all 4 of the security cameras and had the team go through them with a fine-tooth comb, cataloguing every single thing that they saw on the footage. So pedestrians walking past, any cars that drove past, they saw neighbours going to get mail out of their mailbox. They noticed Kristen Stewart, the hairstylist, in her minivan, and hers was just one of 14 cars that drove by in the time period with which they were interested. Once he had all these notes, Reeson put them all together in a spreadsheet and he went through it looking for any repeat entries. And that was when he noticed a black Chevrolet Malibu with chrome mirrors and handles, which was a unique off-market addition, kept popping up throughout the video. The car drove in and out of the frame 6 times during the 20-minute window that they were interested in. Investigators knew that they had to figure out who was driving that car. The license plate was too blurry to read, but the make and model of the vehicle with the chrome additions meant that it would be quite distinguishable if they saw it. They figured that at the very least, this person was most likely the last person to see Mollie alive, so they had to talk to them. The next evening, Deputy Sheriff Steve Keevy pulled up to a stop sign on a back road heading out of Brooklyn. Braking in the opposite direction was a black Chevy Malibu with chrome handles. The deputy sheriff followed the car for a little while before they pulled into an alley, and the car did stop for him. When he approached the driver's side, the driver couldn't speak English, and fortunately they managed to find somebody in the area who would be able to roughly translate, and that was when the driver told him that he worked at Yarrowby Farms and that his name was Cristhian Bahena Rivera. Now, who the heck is Cristhian Bahena Rivera? Well, Bahena was the eldest of 3 children and the only boy. He was a quiet kid, he attended school, and he graduated with the equivalency of freshman year. He loved to play soccer and he played whenever he could, although he'd sustained a nasty head injury during an intense match in the past. In the town that he lived, it was really hard to find jobs, and when he did find them, they paid very poorly. So when he was 17 years old, he decided to cross the border into America with the hope of finding more jobs and more opportunity. Bahena had family in Iowa, and they agreed to pitch in to hire a coyote. Now, a coyote is a person who helps immigrants cross the border into America illegally. Cristhian crossed late one night on an inflatable raft with about 9 or 10 others. They walked around checkpoints, stayed in hotels, and shared one room all together when they needed to get some rest. When they made it to Houston, they all piled into a car and drove the remaining leg to Iowa. Once he got there, Cristhian moved in with an uncle. He helped him find work at a dairy in Blairstown and said that this was a good place to work because they didn't ask for any papers, which is slang for proof of citizenship or documentation. And then after a few years, that's when he moved on to Yarrowby Farm. He made more money and lived in a trailer on the farm, but the farm owners this time did ask for papers. But because Cristhian had been in the country for quite a few years at this point, he had been able to find or create false papers with a fake name. And the fake name that he was living under in the United States was John Budd. Every 2 weeks, Cristhian would make a trip to a local Mexican store, and there he would wire half his paycheck back home to his family. He was helping his parents buy a house, supporting his siblings, and he'd asked his cousin to buy him a car, which was the black Chevy Malibu, and he was paying his cousin back in installments. In his time off, Cristhian's social life revolved around family. He was very active in his local community with social events and birthday parties, and family said that he was a quiet, shy person, but when you got to know him, he would really open up. His aunt described him as very funny, and the children in the family just loved having him around. Throughout his time in the States, and he was there for about 7 years at point of 2018, he'd started dating a woman called Iris Gamboa, and she was a Brooklyn local. Together, they had a daughter, Paulina, and although the relationship didn't last, the two were co-parenting very amicably. Cristhian would text Iris throughout the week for updates on Paulina, and he'd pick her up to have her on the weekends. Iris described Cristhian as a really good father who was responsible and took good care of his daughter. Cristhian didn't have a criminal record, and according to his family, he had never shown any violent tendencies. But because he was terrified of deportation and law enforcement, he totally stuck his head down and avoided running into any issues with the law. He kept to the back roads and pretty much lived under the radar. With his work at Yarrabee Farms, he was cleaning stalls from 5:30 in the morning to about 5 p.m. in the evening, pretty much just shoveling poop the whole day. And then on the hot afternoon of August 20th, the quiet, sleepy little farm sprang to life. The FBI, Homeland Security, and local law enforcement all descended on Yarrabee Farms and swept out across the whole land to look in barns and sheds and search the entire area. At the time, Cristhian didn't automatically associate this arrival of law enforcement with the conversation he'd had with the deputy sheriff the other day. His first thought was that this was an immigration raid. At this point, the agents at the farm pulled Cristhian aside and asked if he would mind riding with them down to the police department for a few further questions. He said sure, and he consented to letting law enforcement search his trailer and his car. When they arrived downtown, Cristhian waited in the officer's lobby for about an hour, hunched over his screen. And then Iowa City police officer Pamela Romero, who was a native Spanish speaker, led Cristhian into an interview room at about 5 p.m. Officer Romero demonstrated to Cristhian that he was not under arrest. He was free to go at any time, and she flipped the lock on the door to show that he was not being kept here against his will. Now, when Romero began questioning Cristhian, what she originally thought was just going to be a fairly straightforward routine interview actually turned into an 11-hour-long marathon. Romero initially began by asking Cristhian if he knew Mollie, and initially he said no. But then she pulled out one of the missing person flyers, and there was Mollie's smiling face beaming up at them. Cristhian said he'd seen those all over town. But then he added that actually he'd seen Mollie's boyfriend Dalton at a gas station. And then he added again that, he also had one of those flyers in his car. Romero stepped out briefly to chat with other detectives who were watching the interview on the live stream on the computer. Cristhian leaned back in his chair and pulled his cap over his eyes to sleep. When she came back in the room, she presented the screenshots of the security camera footage showing his car on the screen. She asked if that was his car, and he said yes. She asked if he was driving alone, and he said yes. And then she pointed out the barely distinguishable silhouette of the person in the background, person being Mollie. And Cristhian said, oh yes, she was running at the time that he was driving past. He said he'd been driving around because he was having difficulty finding a house that he needed to stop by to pick up a vacuum cleaner, so he'd driven past the area a few times. He said she was wearing a sports bra, had her iPhone strapped to her arm, and that she was attractive. And apparently he called her hot, according to Romero. At this point, Cristhian's family members and friends had began to gather in the office's lobby. They tried to text and call Cristhian, but they couldn't get through to him, and they actually stuck around until about 1:30 in the morning when they left to go home and get some rest. And then 9 hours into an 11-hour interview, Cristhian suddenly cracked. He told officers that he hadn't just seen Mollie that night, he had followed her. That was when Cristhian Bahena Rivera told investigators everything that had happened on the evening of the 18th July 2018. During her jog, as Mollie was approaching the edge of town, a black Chevy Malibu had driven past her. She didn't recognize the driver, but on instinct, because she was such a nice person, she had automatically waved and smiled at the driver as they drove past. Then Kristen Stewart, the hairstylist, had driven past, and shortly after she had gone, the black Chevy Malibu came back again, but this time it was following her slowly behind. idling along the road. She was about to approach the halfway point where she would usually turn around and head back the way that she came. And at that point, Cristhian pulled the car over, got out, and ran to catch up with Mollie. Then he began jogging along beside her. And I can say, as a woman, I have had things like this happen before, and it is creepy as hell. And I just can so relate to Mollie in that moment. Like, you don't know what that person's intentions are, you know? It's weird. And quite clearly, Mollie felt the same way, because she was normally very warm and kind with strangers, but she straight away knew that something wasn't right here, and she got spooked. Apparently, at this point, she stepped back, pulled out her phone, and threatened to phone the police if he didn't back off. But this did not deter him. Instead, this just made Cristhian angry. He said he lunged towards her and grabbed her. Mollie started screaming, trying to break free. She was kicking, slapping, trying to push him away. And then Cristhian said he just blacked out. I am so sick of this bullshit blackout defense from these violent offenders. It is such a cop-out to say that, and it is honestly insulting that people think that by not telling you how they did it, it makes it better, you know, or somehow redeems them for the disgusting behavior. I feel like we hear this so much in so many cases of these pathetic people who try and use that as an excuse, and it is so ugly, you know? Cristhian told investigators that whenever he got angry and upset, he would often black out. Then he said when he finally came to and came back into his body, he realized he was driving in the opposite direction out of town, and when he looked down, he realized that he had Mollie's earbuds in his lap, and that is when he remembered that he had the body of Mollie Tibbetts in his trunk. He said he drove out to a secluded part of the country and pulled up near a cornfield. He took Mollie's body out of the trunk, slung it over his shoulder, and he said he remembers there being blood. He said it was like she had just fainted. He carried her about 400 yards into the field, laid her body down, and covered her with corn stalks. Following this early morning confession, agents headed straight out to the cornfield, being led by Bahena on the way. While waiting in a cruiser while agents investigated the scene, Bahena repeated his story. He followed her, she screamed, he blacked out, he brought her here. Agents asked Cristhian for further direction and guidance on where he had put Mollie. So he walked up to the edge of the cornfield and pointed to where he had left her. As investigators approached the area, they saw a pair of neon blue and pink sneakers pointing out from underneath a pile of rotting corn stalks. When they got closer, they discovered the badly decomposed body of a young woman. She was so badly decomposed, in fact, that they could not identify her at that point. So although they knew that it was probably Mollie, she was identified as a Jane Doe. Blood had drained from her body, her fingerprints had worn away, her shorts and underwear had been removed, her legs were spread apart, and her sports bra was pushed up around her neck. An autopsy would later reveal that Mollie had been stabbed a minimum of 9 times, and with such force that the knife actually punctured some of her internal organs and her skull. On her right hand, there was a cut across her knuckles and her thumb, which was consistent with a defensive wound, showing that Mollie Tibbetts had fought for her life. On August 22nd, 2018, Cristhian Bahena Rivera was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Mollie Tibbetts. His bond was initially set at $1 million, but when the prosecutor noted he was a flight risk, it was later increased to $5 million. And although the search for Mollie Tibbetts was over and it had ended in the worst possible way with just the worst outcome, sadly the media frenzy was just beginning. As soon as the news got out that Mollie Tibbetts had been murdered by an undocumented immigrant, it exploded into political fodder. This was 2018 after all, when immigration politics was at a fever pitch. Laura Calderwood, Mollie Tibbett's mother, took a call from Governor Kim Reynolds the day that they learned of the discovery of Mollie's body. She said the two of them cried together, and Kim offered beautiful words of kindness and support, and that was something that she really appreciated that day, that she later told the Washington Post a few months later. And friends and family fought back the tears as police revealed in a press conference that they believed they had found the body of Mollie Tibbetts.
A first-degree murder charge was filed today in connection with the disappearance of Mollie Tibbetts, who was last seen jogging in Brooklyn, Iowa on July 18, 2018. A complaint and affidavit names Cristhian Bahena Rivera, age 24, who resides in rural Poweshiek County, and he has been charged with murder in the first degree. Dozens of law enforcement officials from local, state, and federal agencies were involved in the investigation after the disappearance of Mollie Tibbetts. A body was discovered early this morning in a farm field southeast of Brooklyn, Iowa. The identity has not been confirmed, however, we believe it to be the body of Mollie Tibbetts.
But then, just as cameras were going live for a 4 p.m. press conference held by Governor Kim Reynolds, she released a statement that was a starkly different tone to the one that she had shared with Laura, Mollie's mother, just earlier. She said, quote, "We are angry that a broken immigration system allowed a predator to live in our community like this, and we will do all we can to bring justice to Mollie's killer," unquote. Governor Kim Reynolds was just one of the many to take Mollie's story and twist it to fit their messed up political agenda. In the wake of Mollie's death, politicians started using her as a symbol or an instrument to publicize the need to enact their policies. President Trump took Mollie's story and started using it to drum up support to build his stupid wall. Racist graffiti started appearing all over Des Moines in Iowa, which was about 70 miles from Brooklyn. And in fact, there had been many Hispanic events planned that summer, but event organizers decided to cancel them because they were so afraid of what the backlash might be from these white supremacists. A conservative group started distributing postcards decrying the fact that Bahena's defense would be paid for by the taxpayer. And members mailed the cards to a judge that was presiding over the case, and in fact he said that he had received over 500 by the time the verdict was read. There was a white supremacist in Idaho who was sending out robocalls, which is a way of manipulating the area code to make it look like it was an Iowa phone number, saying that the Tibbetts family were a disgrace to their own race, which is honestly just absolutely disgusting. He said that if Mollie were brought back to life, she would want to kill all the immigrants. And now Mollie's family were just outraged by this discourse that was going on, and they said that this was the complete opposite of Mollie's beliefs and values. Her family said that Mollie would have found these views to be profoundly racist, and that she would have been vehemently opposed to them. Yarrabee farm owners revealed that they had received hundreds of death threats after it became public that they had employed Bahena. The vitriol became so overwhelming that Mollie's own funeral, attended by over 1,200 people, which was almost the entire population of the town of Brooklyn, was dedicated pretty much entirely to the politicization of her death. Her father, Rob, said that the Hispanic community are Iowans. They share the same values as the rest of them and deserve to be treated as such. The overwhelming political debate actually led Rob Tibbetts to write an opinion piece for the Des Moines Register, pretty much begging people to stop this bullshit and leave them alone. He wrote that Mollie was nobody's victim, nor was she a pawn in any kind of political agenda. He begged for their family to be allowed to grieve with privacy and dignity and to actually do right by their family and Mollie's memory. So over the next 3 years, Cristhian's trial would be delayed and rescheduled time and time again, and the latest delay came as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But finally, on May 17th, 2021, his trial actually began to take place in Davenport in Iowa. Cristhian had consistently maintained his innocence, And although the prosecutors were never able to find a murder weapon, they never found Mollie's phone or her Fitbit, they believed they had a pretty strong case. After finding Mollie's body, investigators had matched her DNA to a spot of blood in the trunk of Bahena's car. So the combination of the DNA evidence, obviously his confession, and his car being in the vicinity of Mollie's last sighting made for a pretty strong case, and the defense really did have their work cut out for them. So they took a different strategy. They tried to poke holes in the investigation, saying that the police just had tunnel vision, and weirdly, they kind of began an attack on Mollie's boyfriend Dalton. There was a fierce cross-examination of him on the stand, and they brought up the fact that Dalton had in fact cheated on Mollie quite early on in their relationship, but he said that they'd worked past it, they were okay, they'd moved on. And it was really weird how they tried to assassinate Dalton's character like that, especially because regardless of any of that, he still had a rock-solid alibi. He was 120 miles away in Dubuque, and people were there to account for that. So that line of questioning pretty much led nowhere. And then Cristhian himself took the stand, and he completely changed his story. Now, firstly, it's actually very, very unusual that the defense would put the defendant on the stand like that. It almost never helps the case, and I've heard some lawyers say about this particular event that those lawyers will never get another case again because that was quite a balls up. But when he got on the stand, he told a completely different version of events. He said that he hadn't been entirely truthful before, but now he was laying all his cards out on the table. And I can only think that it's because I guess they had nothing else to go with. They thought that they would try this. But anyway, he said that that night he hadn't actually killed Mollie. Instead, he was taken hostage by two fully clothed, masked men who forced him to drive around looking for her while she was out jogging. Bahena said he didn't actually see the murder, but he felt them put something in the trunk. They then told him to drive to the cornfield and threatened that if he told anybody what happened, they would harm his daughter. Then, mysteriously, the two men disappeared, leaving Cristhian with his car, his phone, and the body of a woman who he apparently didn't even know in the trunk of his vehicle. Not surprisingly, the jury didn't really go for this story, and after just under 8 hours of deliberation, on May 28, 2021, the jury found Cristhian Bahena Rivera guilty for murder in the first degree.
At this time, Mr. Bahena, I'm going to ask that you rise along with your attorneys, please. And I would ask that the court attendant read the jury's verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Cristhian Bahena Rivera, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
Thank you, Carrie. You may be seated, please.
Then on July 8th, about 6 weeks after Cristhian's testimony, according to the defense, two witnesses came forward to corroborate Cristhian's story about what had happened to him. In light of this new evidence, Bahena's attorneys demanded a new trial, but the judge denied their request. And with that, on August 30th, 2021, so as of filming this, that was just a week ago, Cristhian was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is the mandatory sentence for being found guilty in the first degree of murder. During the sentencing, Mollie's mother Laura read out a victim impact statement to the court. She said, quote, "Mollie was a young woman who simply wanted to go for a quiet run on the evening of July 18th, and you violently and sadistically took that from her," unquote. She then recalled the feeling of hearing what had happened to her daughter and having to rush to tell family before they heard about it through the news. She said that the hardest part of all of it was telling Mollie's grandmother what had happened to her and how her grandmother just couldn't believe that somebody would choose to harm such a beautiful and vibrant young woman. She talked of how Mollie's murder had led many of the Hispanic people working in the area to flee in fear. How Mollie's boyfriend was never going to be able to give her the engagement ring that he'd bought for her. Mollie's father would never walk her down the aisle. And Mollie's mother would never get to see her own daughter grow up and become a mother herself. Dalton Jack, Mollie's boyfriend, was so heartbroken after the discovery of Mollie's body that he said he just had to get away. So he actually enlisted in the army and deployed to Iraq 3 months after Mollie's body was found. And throughout this absolute nightmare of a story, one thing has remained consistent, and that has been that Mollie's family have conducted themselves with such dignity and grace and love, and it is an inspiring thing to watch. Following the political firestorm, Mollie's mother actually opened her doors to 17-year-old Ulysses Felix. He was the son of 2 of the Hispanic workers who were working alongside Christian actually at the Yarrabee farms. Following all of the racist backlash, they had fled in fear back to Mexico, but they'd left their son behind. He didn't want to leave the United States. He was attending Brooklyn, Guernsey and Malcolm Community School, and he wanted to finish his school years there. So Laura had welcomed him into her home and said that she would care for him as best she could while he finished school in absence of his parents. And can you imagine the warmth and love from this woman, that despite the absolute horrific pain she was going through having just lost her daughter and all of this racist political crap happening around her, that she still opens her heart to help somebody else. I just think that is such a beautiful action, you know? Mollie's case also fueled discussions globally about the dangers that women face while they're out running, and how many women have been attacked or hurt in some way while out for a regular jog. A hashtag popped up called Miles for Mollie, and female runners around the world would share it ahead of their runs. They would dedicate races for her. They would dedicate their own runs for her. Some would use it to raise awareness for the dangers that women face. Some would use it to share safety precautions, and others would use it to discuss the fact that women are the ones who are supposed to be responsible for our own safety, instead of attackers being taught not to attack people. Mollie's own friends started the Mollie movement, which encouraged people around the world to conduct random acts of kindness every day, which was Mollie's favourite thing to do. Mollie's mother Laura established a memorial fund in her name that would benefit the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Unit at the University of Iowa. And at the time of filming this, the fund had raised over $150,000. Winding back a little bit, almost a year after Mollie went missing, her friends and family celebrated what would have been her 21st birthday. They had ice cream cake, which was Mollie's favourite, and spent the day doing random acts of kindness in her honour. And on a clear day, a few weeks after that, Mollie's family gathered together in the Healing Garden at the Grinnell Regional Medical Centre. They just created this beautiful space for patients in recovery to come and relax and find some peace. They unveiled a statue which stood 8 feet tall and showed a smiling Mollie with a dog leash tangled around her arm, her head thrown back, and her leg raised in a sprint. And that is all I have for you on the case of Mollie Tibbetts today. And I hope you can see from everything that we've learned throughout this story that this family is remarkable, just incredible. And I was so touched by how they seem so genuine, just so kind and warm-hearted and empathetic. And it is devastating that that beautiful young woman had her life cut short, because it seems like she just radiated love and positivity. And her father has said that, you know, he doesn't want to paint his daughter as this perfect saint and that she was really just like every other kid, and not to put her on this pedestal, but I think, you know, she's pretty perfect, right? In the most amazing way. And yeah, she's just like every other kid, and that is kind of what makes it so sad. It's just like this amazing person with so much life ahead of her and so much to offer the world just had that taken away from her, and it is so heartbreaking. And so senseless, you know, like for what? That's just terrible. But I guess you know, my biggest takeaway from this is seeing how her family have held themselves in her name, in her honor, in her memory. How warm, loving, and open they are is honestly a lesson to all of us. Like, that is inspiring. And I guess Mollie's impact really has had this ripple effect around the world. You know, here I am in Auckland, New Zealand, talking about how this 20-year-old woman has so profoundly impacted me, and that's pretty amazing. So I hope that that's what people take away from this case, is that this family are remarkable. In the face of the worst possible tragedy that you could ever experience, they have shown love and kindness. So yeah, what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you have any case requests, please go ahead and drop them down below. I check all of them. Otherwise, if you're still with me, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for sticking around. I hope you're staying safe and well. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.